Welcome back. In this lesson, we'll be diving headfirst into modeling our car. And we've established the budget, the polygon budget of 100,000 polygons, which should be pretty easy to meet for something like this. We'll pull off a few tricks here and there to get things in range. And something to do, and this is all personal preference, is to just go to your configure, and we'll go to statistics, and we'll enable total plus selection, triangle count, edge count, vertex count, poly count. We don't need frames per second. And again, this is just personal preference. Now, if you hit 7, that will show you the statistics that you just enabled. All right, in my viewport here, I've got concept images for the car. And again, these aren't accurate to manufacturer spec. If you wanted to do something that was absolutely accurate, you could buy manufacturer blueprints online or something like that. For what we're doing here, these work. You don't have to use them, but I find that it's easier to have images to follow along with, especially when modeling different views. It makes it easier to pull edges and verts across different planes. And I also have reference images up on my second monitor, like actual photographs that I'm looking at, just to kind of get an idea of how things look. You could do this without having the orthographic reference images, but I find that just makes life easier. Alrighty, and so the process we're going to apply to this is basically we're going to edge model as much of this vehicle as we can. We will be using derivative modeling in some cases where applicable. And of course, with our edge modeling, we'll be subdividing that. The final goal is to edge model, add a subdivision to get in our curves and the detail where we need it, and then go into that subdivided model and remove loops that we don't need, optimize edges, triangulate edges where needed, and basically just do an optimization pass to get things down to the poly count. As far as edge modeling, just as a primer, it's basically starting out with a piece of geometry. I'll just turn on edge faces here. And just grabbing edges and moving them to your heart's content. Once you're done, then you subdivide, and that smooths everything out. Derivative modeling is basically just starting with something that closely matches. I'll isolate this object. Something that closely matches whatever you're trying to build. So for example, if we had like a headlight housing or something that was cylindrical in nature, you basically just start out with an object that matches that with enough sides so we get nice smooth curves. And then we basically convert that to an editable poly and make any additional edits that we needed to that object. Something to be mindful of here, though, is when you work like this, you won't be applying subdivision to this object because you've already started out with a high enough poly count where you don't need subdivision. However, you still need to have support edges. And I'll show you why in just a second. So I'll just go ahead and smooth this out just to give you a quick example. And so it looks like that. But we'll still need support edges because we don't want these gradients and we're transitioning, and we want some edges on here to be hard. So if you go through with your Swift Loop tool, add a support edge there. And if you wanted this to be sharp, then when you look at it now, it kind of looks like this. And so we're getting a pretty good result, smoothing-wise, and it's almost looking like a subdivided model, but of course we don't have a subdivision or turbo smooth applied. And so we just leave this as is, basically. Another thing we'll be doing is, of course, we'll be deleting back faces or unwanted faces. just to kind of optimize things. So another technique we'll be doing is we'll also be crashing objects into each other. It really depends on what's going to happen to the geometry, whether or not it's going to deform. Some people like to seam everything in. That is where you just cut edges in here and weld the verts. If the object isn't going to be deformed or scaled or anything crazy, it's totally acceptable to crash things. This is faster, and it's also fewer polygons because you're not having to cut everything here in. You could argue against that because it really depends on how well you seam everything in, but again, crashing is totally acceptable. Alrighty, I'll go ahead and just delete that. The only other thing to be aware of with crashing objects is, depending on what you're doing, your ambient occlusion maps will come out a little different if you're baking out maps. And you'll just have to take that into consideration when you're doing texture work. Alrighty, so we're ready to go now, and what we're going to do is we'll start with the wheel arch. And with something like this, it's always best to start with less edges, because we are going to subdivide this, and the fewer edges you have to push and pull, the easier that will make things. Automotive modeling is time consuming, anyone will tell you that. But the more you do it, the faster you'll get at it, and the better things will look. You'll be spending a lot of time, pulling edges and moving things around and just basically tweaking your model. And so if you're starting out from a smaller edge count, it just gives you less verts and stuff that you're having to mess around with. That being said, we can go ahead and start with about 16 sides. I'll just delete my edit poly modifier here. Let's just go ahead, move this out so we can get a better view of what's happening. I'll turn on X-ray mode, which is Alt X, just so I can see through to my reference image. And so now you can see that we've got a smaller edge count. I'll go ahead and add back the edit poly modifier. That's just a quick button that I had set up in a previous lesson. And now we'll switch to border mode. Actually, before we do that, let's go ahead and select this face, inverter selection, delete everything, then switch to border mode. And with the outer border selected, we'll just grab our scale tool and scale up once. And we're doing this because there's a sharp edge here in my reference images around the wheel well, and so we're needing that, and so I just kind of added the support edge for that. Once we've got that done, we'll just go ahead and grab this face here, delete that, delete, and delete those faces there. Key things to look out for here is we're needing to have an edge wherever there's going to be panel separation. So like for here, we're needing an edge here, and you could grab and move your edge kind of like so, and then cut another edge in here and reposition it, or you can leave that edge intact, just grab your Swift Loop tool, put an edge here, remove that edge, and just add one back. I've also seen people just select an edge, chamfer until they get it where they need it, and then remove the unwanted edges. And so same thing would go for here. You'd reposition that, and add an edge there. And of course, once you put that in, you've got to move it to make sure it follows the wheel arc there. And you can also employ your edge constraints just to kind of straighten things out a little bit. Right, turn off edge constraint, and we'll just drag this edge down. Same thing with these. And if you grab your scale tool, you'd be able to just straighten those. And what we're doing here is basically just getting a nice straight edge there. Okay, so we'd use a similar process for the back wheel arch as well. And again, you'd spend some time just kind of tweaking things to make sure you get a nice smooth arc here. What you could do at this point is also add a turbo smooth modifier. just to kind of see how things are curving, get an idea. And then what we can do here is we can switch to our front viewport. Just grab our object here, move it in, and then we'll switch to vertex mode. We'll just grab these verts and just move them in so it follows the curve of the car here. And some people will build both wheel arches and then connect them and then do this. I find it a little easier to do it this way because what's happening here is you have fewer vertices present right now. And so it's easier to just move those than if you had the back wheel arch and edges running across here. It is a matter of personal preference though. So you just grab these edges here, just back to your right viewport. And just move these edges up. Now we can switch to our front viewport. And grab these verts. And just move them across. Kind of like so. Alrighty, and so we grab these edges here as well. Extend them out, and then extend them out again. And we'll just be repeating this process quite a bit just to get everything going. Once you have that, we'd of course switch to the front view. And just move these. And we can switch on our turbo smooth, isolate our object, turn off X-ray mode, and just to kind of get an idea of what's going on. Target weld. And now it's kind of looking like that. And of course, you'd grab these verts. You can use your edge constraint and just move them in, basically repositioning them to follow your blueprint. And now, once you have that, and when you switch between your turbo smooth and your edit poly, and you're noticing that you're needing an edge there, you could just go in, swift loop, or you could just connect these edges and just add your edge there. Alrighty, that concludes this lesson. I look forward to seeing you in the next.